A big thank you to all my patrons who support the Engineered Mind podcast. Hi and welcome to the Engineered Mind podcast, episode 57. In this podcast, we cover topics such as engineering, AI, neuroscience, life, and other interesting topics and fascinating ideas to educate, inspire, and engineer people's minds all around the world. I'm your host Yusuf, and for this episode of the podcast, I'm very excited to welcome Bilal Zaidi to my show. Bilal is the founder and CEO of the great podcast CreatorLab. He's a multi-time entrepreneur and creator, having previously built and scaled a successful e-commerce store as a teen and led partnership teams at Google and charity Water. CreatorLab is a podcast and digital marketing consultancy. On his weekly podcast, Bilal interviews world-class creators and entrepreneurs to break down the tactics behind how they build their businesses. CreatorLab has been listened to in over 100 countries and featured world-renowned guests from Gary Vee to Pomp, Pompliano and Jack Butcher. In this very interesting podcast, we covered entrepreneurship, marketing, branding and business positioning, quitting the rat race, how to become successful in today's world, how to embrace embarrassment, and so much more. For updates on upcoming podcasts, projects, and videos, make sure to follow me on Twitter as well as on Instagram. To join my weekly newsletter engineeredmind.sh, where I share exclusive content, visit yusuf.substack.com. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here's my podcast with Bilal Zaidi. Okay, welcome Bilal. It's very nice to have you on my show.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, man. Appreciate the invite.
Awesome. So I'm very much appreciating your time being on the show and talking about marketing today and a lot of other stuff. But before we jump into that, people who might not know who Bilal is, can you talk about who you are, what you do, and talk a little bit about your podcast, CreatorLab?
Yeah, for sure, man. Yeah, so I'm Bilal Zaidi. I'm based in New York nowadays, but as you can probably tell, I'm originally from London. I grew up in London anyway. My parents are originally Pakistani. That's where my name comes from. And so, yeah, I guess today we're in 2021. I currently run a podcast called CreatorLab where I interview mostly entrepreneurs, but I've had all sorts of people from investors. I've even had like Hollywood actresses and mentalists, all sorts of people, but all around this theme of entrepreneurship, business, and creating things. So that's the podcast. We can definitely dig into that a little bit more later. I also run a digital marketing agency consultancy, basically. So I work mostly with VC-backed startups who are in growth mode. So they've already figured out by this stage like some sort of product market fit, and they want to scale that out to more people. So that's kind of what I help with. Before that, I spent most of my career at Google. I was there for 7.5 years. Google and YouTube, and then also a couple years at a non-profit called Charity Water, which was trying to end the world war crisis around the world. So that's most of my professional background. And then before that, just it's probably worth mentioning, I also was kind of like a teenage entrepreneur. So at the age of 16, I started e-commerce, small e-commerce in air quotes. It wasn't like a huge business, but helped me pay through university and taught me a lot. So I had an e-commerce business and also an online publisher. So I had a big Arsenal football website, which had about 500,000 users on it. So yeah, if you look back, it's a combination of this. So there's a bunch of noise out there, but yeah, there's a combination of online growing stuff, working with big companies and startups, and then a little bit of non-profit and my own projects.
Yeah, that's great. Also, I heard from another podcast that you have some kind of an entrepreneurial background from your dad. So you kind of inherited it from him, right?
Yeah, a little bit. So the thing with my dad is he's never actually, I mean, he did actually start a restaurant, or he was part of a restaurant in Pakistan, but he didn't actually ever start a company, but he invested quite well. So from quite a young age, he taught me like the importance of balancing the book every month, your monthly budget. By the way, is this like really loud and distracting? Because
no. I think this is fine. This is fine, I guess.
Okay, cool. Sorry if we need to restart, but yeah, there's a van that does this once in a while. They come and like play loud music for some reason. Sorry about that. So anyway. But yeah, so I'll just say that last point again in case we want to edit that out. But yeah, so my dad never actually started a company necessarily, but he taught me a lot about investing quite early on. So he worked in banking, and he would like help me look at like the monthly budget every month for our household. And he would also say stuff like, make me look at like shares that he'd invested in, and then eventually real estate and property, which is what they've been focused on for the last 20 years.
Incredibly interesting. I read on your personal website that the genesis of CreatorLab basically evolved through meeting people who are unhappy with their life or with their lives. Do you think this is also, does it also fit to you in particular?
Yeah, it was actually probably more so me at the time. I was probably more the person who was unhappy, and the people I was interviewing were people who seemed to have figured something out that I hadn't. So that was more the way around. So yeah, at that stage when I started, it was 2015. I was, on the outside, everything looked pretty good. I worked at Google for 5 years. I was earning 6-figure salary. Everything looked pretty good, right? But on the inside, I was kind of like a little bit depressed. Didn't really have much meaning. I was like really bored at work. I wasn't learning anymore. And I was doing all the things that people do when they're bored. So getting very unhealthy, like not a very good thing. So I kind of needed something else to like see examples of something outside of my day to day. And that's kind of what helped me get out of that slump.
Mm-hmm. I'm very happy actually that you did it, because when I listened to your podcast, for example, the last episode I listened to was the one with Jack Butcher. And I hope to have him on my show maybe in the future. Let's see maybe if he sees the podcast. And actually, you inspire quite a lot of people, I would say, including myself. And if you wouldn't have taken the step to become like this kind of entrepreneurial Bilal, how we know him today, it would have been a pity, in my opinion.
Thanks, man. Yeah, no, I appreciate it a lot. And yeah, it's kind of part of my longer term vision, I guess, is like in my tiny little way, even if it's you and one other person who listens, that's already worthwhile, because it definitely takes a lot of time and energy. And sometimes we spend 10, 15, 20 hours even on one episode, because it takes time researching, recording for a few hours, editing, sometimes 10 hours. We turn those into clips, write about it. But, to me, I've had to make the mental switch around. If I was doing this purely for money, I would have stopped doing it a long time ago. Like, There's a lot better ways to make money. But I have to like enjoy the craft of doing it. So even stuff like editing, I now have an editor, but in the beginning, I learned how to edit, and I taught myself the creative skills to do that. And I see that as kind of like a fun craft to develop. And it's part of storytelling, which maybe we'll talk about as well today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When it comes to the framework of growing, I have put some notes down, which is including branding, marketing, how to actually stand out, and humility. I think humility is something which a lot of people don't think about. Let's start maybe with branding. What is your opinion on branding? How important is it to grow actually?
Yeah, and when you say grow, do you mean a company, my podcast, or like personally? Like, I guess it can be applied to all three of those, but what did you have like a lens you were thinking from?
Actually, I was thinking about all those three.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I'd say like generally branding I think is incredibly important, and I think I would put branding and marketing kind of like side by side, because I think brand to me is really about what people see and feel about your brand, so whether that's the brand of Bilal or the brand of CreatorLab or the brand of Nike. When I say Nike, there's an image that pops up in your head, and it's probably come from 20 plus years of ads you've seen on TV, Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan and football stars on TV wearing Nike and sharing those epic stories. So I think that's the kind of like fluffy stuff, which is really important, but like the storytelling part. But I think a lot of people think of that from a company point of view as, oh, that's the branding department's job. Like, let them just go and deal with the brand, like make something pretty and put it out on a TV ad or YouTube ad nowadays. But I think branding actually starts from the very top. Like the founder, the CEO has to prioritize it. And I've seen examples where you can tell the founder really cares versus ones who it's not in their DNA to care about that. And I could give a couple of examples in a second, but you see the difference. And so I think creating a beautiful brand is incredibly important, but there's a fine line with everything, right? Like sometimes someone can stop them from starting because they're trying to figure out the brand from day one and they just don't even launch anything. So I think there's a fine line between creating something that's perfect and something you're proud of at a high level. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of how I think of branding and the importance of it.
Definitely. What would you say when people think about Bilal himself? What do people think about? For example, when I heard Bilal, I know CreatorLab, I know how the thumbnails look like, I know what you wear, what kind of microphone you have, that it's always in the same position. Is it part of branding?
That's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting because you're actually right. Like right now I'm wearing the same thing, and I don't actually do that. Well, that's funny because one part is because it's one of the few things I wear at home, because nowadays we're recording at home, that isn't a hoodie, you know, like sometimes I wear a hoodie as well, but so it is something I think about. I try not to overthink it. I think the mic positioning and the background is more like, once I've got a template, I just try to not think about it anymore, you know. So in the beginning I thought about it. Normally there's actually a chair behind me, which isn't there today, but like those are things I thought about, the frame and the quality of the sound and all those things. But I think there's a difference between like what you think of Bilal when you interview me and follow me from afar versus obviously what my friend would think, colleagues would think, family would think. So I'd answer your question, what do people think? I've actually done this exercise where I've written it out, where I've kind of asked people and I've thought about it myself, and it's quite a good exercise because you realize what you think of yourself, it often isn't the same. And that's normally just a good thing to know. So I think from very early on, like a young age, I was always known within my friend group as someone who was quite tech savvy. So that I was the one they came to like burn CDs and like make music CDs, right? Or my computer's broken, how do I do this? Or I'm thinking about getting this phone, like what do you think about it? So that's always been the case for a long time. Then by the time I landed at Google, that became a big part of my brand, so to speak. And from my friend group that weren't in Google anyway. And obviously, you know, that's a slightly conscious, but it also became part of my reality, right? Like I was there for 7.5 years from age 21 to 28. That's like, you know, some of the most formative years of your life. So my work life, it definitely became a big part of my brand. But I always was quite conscious of not making that like, you know, the only thing you think about, because as much as I love Google and I think they've done an incredible job, like I'm not just a pure Google person. I tried to take what I learned from Google, which is how do you think with data? How do you think about scale at a next level? How do you keep improving things, open source, all those things that we think about with the internet. Maybe the perception of Google is a bit different now, but I'm saying 10 years ago, that was kind of what it was. But then, you know, if you look at all my friends who are still at Google, they're not really doing what I'm doing. It's a very different sort of lifestyle, right? Like they're working now at a very big company with 100,000 plus people. I'm working in a company of one. So it's a very different sort of vibe. So now I think I've become more known for, you know, the intersection of business and creativity is what I think a lot of people think about now, or I'd hope to anyway, from the people I interview. You know, there's always that business lens, which is like numbers driven. How do we get stuff done? What's the product like? What's the stuff we can learn from technology frameworks and startup frameworks? I love that stuff. But also I can talk to Tim Urban for an hour about how he writes, you know, and like that to me is as interesting as anything, because the creative part is the part you can't really replicate that easily. So, and a lot of people don't know this, but I have a bit of that creative part in me too. So I write a lot. I used to even perform spoken word poetry at some point, where I would go and like perform stuff in front of people, and it was like my creative art form. I love stand-up comedy. Like these are the things that like actually entertain me day to day. So that's probably what I'd say I'd land in between those two things.
Mm-hmm. Would you say you flourish more now that you left your classical 9-to-5, how people like to call it?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say I don't regret like doing that stuff, because it gave me a foundation to build on top of. I'm also not against people having jobs. I think jobs are incredible. If you get a good job, there's a lot of benefits to it. At the moment, yeah, for my current stage of life, the current mind space I'm in, I love kind of what I'm doing right now, because I get more freedom. I get to choose what I work on. I get to choose the clients that I work on when that happens as well. I fill my days with stuff that are like entertaining my mind, you know, so, but I needed to do the 10, 15 years worth of work before that to kind of get in the position to be able to do this now, you know? So, and who knows, maybe in the future that changes. If I had kids, which I don't at the moment, maybe that kind of separation between work and play is more important to me, and I want to be able to finish at 6 p.m. every day and get on with my normal home life. But at the moment, you know, especially in the last year, man, we're just being at home, right? Like I haven't done much. I've been stuck at home for like a year pretty much. So like everyone else. So to me, there is no like separation right now. Like sometimes I work until 2 a.m. in the morning, and some days I won't work until 2 p.m. because I want to like read a book or go for a walk. So that to me at this current stage, that's kind of freedom that I'm looking for, you know? And of course the other stuff is money. Like I'm not going to pretend money is not important. It is. Like I want to make money, but I'm not optimizing primarily for maximizing income either, because I've just seen too many people who do that are very unhappy. So I'm optimizing primarily for happiness, learning, flexibility, and close second is income. But I think being self-employed, you have a lot more upside with income anyway, because, you know, even just from a straight up client work side, like if I have a job, I have one client basically. As you listen to the convo with Jack Butcher, right? We talked about that. So I could have 3, 4, 5 clients now if I wanted to. So it just depends on how you see it.
Yeah, and I also think you mentioned work and play, and there's this famous quote from Naval, who I think said, if you find something that looks like work to others but play to you, then you kind of made it. Do you feel in the position, being in the position right now where this is true?
Not, I wouldn't say I'm completely there. I love Naval's quotes for sure, and I think he's an incredibly wise guy. But I will say sometimes people not saying you're doing this, but a lot of people hear the one beautiful tweet and they see it in absolutes. They're like, well, this is, if I'm not playing all the time, that means I haven't made it. And to me, it's always, you know, this. I'm sure there's stuff in Naval's day he doesn't like to do either, right? Maybe he's close to not doing that. But I'd say for me, I'd say I'm like 70% the way there. And the other 30% is always stuff. There's always going to be something I don't love doing, and that evolves over time too. But I've done a pretty good job of limiting that now as much as I can. But that's going to change, you know, like for example, the podcast, like that 20 hours worth of work, like I said, let's say 8 or 10 hours of that is editing. I've now outsourced that, and I'm happy to pay someone to do that, because that's 10 hours that I don't need to do it. And like, I don't actually mind the editing, but it just takes too much time. So those 10 hours are better used playing in another way.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. When it comes to marketing, and you also mentioned digital marketing, which channels would you personally use? Let's say you start from scratch and you would have to build your brand from scratch again. Which channels would you use for marketing purposes or advertisement?
Yeah, for sure. So again, I would always start this with like, who is it for, and like what resources do they have? So if it was for me as an individual, let's say I don't have any money to spend on ads or very limited, versus a client of mine who has raised $100 million in venture funding, they're in a position where they can afford to spend money. So I would start, before we even talk about spending money though, is like, what is the message? Like, have you actually figured out something that is useful to people? Mm-hmm. And have you clearly defined who those people are? Because one of the things I think I did that I've improved over time with the podcast is I've like really honed into the sort of person who likes my stuff. So I can generally tell you the people that listen to my show like entrepreneurship. They have a sprinkle of that creativity in them. They might be technology focused, but not always. Like they're at least interested in how technology can be used. And they're probably into like personal development and growth, right? Like personal growth. And those are things I care about too. So that's kind of who I made it for someone like me. And I know there's millions of people out there that are just like me. So I would start with that point. Like, do I know who the person is? Because then the marketing part or the digital marketing part, the way we're defining it here, becomes a lot easier, because the more tightly you've defined that sort of person, the easier it is to go and find them and figure out, you know, you go through the playbook, like where do those people hang out? So for my podcast, a lot of those people are hanging out on Twitter. So I've become a lot more active on Twitter in the last like 3-4 months, you'll see. Mm-hmm. But for a company I work with, that might be LinkedIn. It might be on YouTube. So I wouldn't say there's like necessarily one place. And another thing I'll add on marketing specifically, similar to what I said about branding, I would say similarly, and even more so for marketing, is I see marketing as like part of every part of the org. So like if I'm the CEO, I would look at, I've got a marketing department that is like, running shop for the whole company, but customer service is a part of marketing. Like the way if you've ever had a phone call with a bank and you've had a terrible experience on the phone, like that is a marketing problem. It's part customer service problem, but the marketing team should be involved in that, in my opinion, or a marketing mind should be involved in that. The product, the way you open a physical product, that is part marketing. The storytelling that goes into that, the banner ad you see on the internet, obviously is also marketing. So there's so many parts. So I just see anything that is customer facing, externally facing, I think there's an eye that a marketer can say, is this still aligned with what we promised our customer? Do you know what I mean? Like because I'll give one specific example. There's a company I've worked with in the past. They were just trying to drive signups for their product, right? And they found, like, an engineer said, well, if we just put a pop-up on the screen when they get to this page, they're going to have to sign up to like join. And I just said, well, yeah, but like, are they going to come back? Are they actually going to there's going to be people that drop off. So your artificial number would increase in the short term, but long term, what do they feel about the brand? Do they actually want to, have we done the work to give them the taste of what we're going to promise them later? So it's just stuff like that. I think it's about thinking long term and figuring out, like, who is that customer? What do they care about? Have you defined the problem for them? And then once you've understood that, then you can storytell and you can tell them very in simple terms, this is the problem we know you have, because you've done the work to figure that out, and these are the ways we're going to help you. And that's the marketing part from a theoretical standpoint. Then you get into all the tactics and you get into the media buying, and is Facebook ads better than Google ads and stuff like that. And so we can definitely go into that. I'm happy to share my experience on that. But I think before you even get to that stage, you need to figure out the first part, which is a part of the marketing too.
So first defining the target persona, basically.
Persona, and the way I've done it before, there's something called the objective first framework that I've used this is borrowed from General Assembly, but you're essentially starting with the objective. And in other companies, people use OKRs, yes, like objective and key results. It's the same sort of thing, but you're really saying, so even for a marketing goal, like, you have to be very specific with what that is, and you have to rank. You have to make primary KPIs, right? So your objective could be, we want to sign up people, right, to our site. Of course, everyone wants to sign people up to their product, but what is that? Where is that specific marketing campaign? Because there's multiple campaigns running at once. Where is that on the funnel? Is that awareness? Is it interest? Is it desire? Is it action? So that's the traditional marketing funnel, AIDA, right? So if it's an awareness campaign, the KPI that you're going to set for that, the primary KPI, should only be one KPI. And that normally, if it's an awareness campaign, it's not a conversion. It's not someone signing up to your site. It's normally, how many people did we reach? How many people got to the landing page? Did they stay on the page? Did they read what we wanted them to read? Did they watch the video that we created? And that's the first touch point, because most businesses don't convert someone straight away. When I say convert, meaning sign up in this case. It could be a sale, it could be a sign up. But if that's like a consumer facing, if you think of a B2B company, an agency, or like Salesforce doesn't, just click an ad on Salesforce and then sign up for a $200,000 contract, right? Like, there's a whole sales process there. So I think that's it's all, for me, it's the approach is always starting with those principles. The AIDA funnel works still. It's not like we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. Other people call it like there's a flywheel and all this different stuff. Like that's fine. Like, you can use that too. But really it's about, does someone know who I am? Are they interested in what we're selling? And now have we convinced them to buy from us? And then you can get to like retention. Will they spread it to their friends? How we get them to, will they purchase multiple times? So that's kind of how I think about it. But I think sometimes people overcomplicate that and they use all this jargon. And in reality, like, you just need to be more precise with the goal and make sure the way you're measuring it is set up correctly as well.
That makes complete sense, Bilal. Thank you so much for sharing. Few seconds you mentioned that you and your podcast trying to stand out is quite hard, because a lot of people have this kind of overlap between business and interested in podcast. How do you actually stand out? Let's now take branding aside. How do you actually stand out in today's world? Because in one podcast, I think you mentioned that even if someone from YouTube or Google would start a channel today, it doesn't guarantee that they will actually even reach 1,000 subscribers.
Completely. I mean, the skills you learn at a big company are very valuable. Like, I'm not saying that those people are some of the smartest people in the world. They've gone to the top schools, they've got A's since they're like 6 years old. Very smart people, but being smart is not enough to create something. If you look at entrepreneurs, it's not based on just being smart. You need to be smart enough, but there's other parts that make those people successful. So a lot of that is mental. So that's why in my interviews you'll hear me talk a lot about like struggles and stuff that you've had to overcome, not just in like the PR way of, like you had a bad time or you cried and now look, you're a billionaire. No, I'm saying like you're still struggling with this today. Like the episode I just put out this week, Nick Huber, who's really big in the real estate game, this guy was talking about crying on the side of a street, like calling his mom up on the phone. Like he wasn't saying that to look good. Do you know what I mean? It was like the real deal. So a lot of those people, and I'm not picking on Google, I'm saying anyone who's more suited to a job day to day, and there's nothing wrong with that. Those people don't necessarily have the flexibility or the mindset to be able to deal with looking like an idiot, falling on your face 10 times, convincing people of stuff and they keep saying no, and having thick skin to be able to deal with that. That's a very specific skill set for entrepreneurship, in my opinion. And I think there's a lot of I think entrepreneurship is kind of cool nowadays, and it has been for maybe 10, 15 years. But like if you go back 30 years ago, our parents, I don't want to judge, but like I'm sure your parents may be the same. Like they were like, be an engineer or be a doctor or something safe, right? Like you make a good life for yourself. That was good advice 20, 30 years ago. But and actually today is probably still great advice for most people. But for someone like me, that wasn't going to be the thing. Like I'm like way too wacky to be stuck in doing the same thing every day. So it's just, it depends on the person and what they care about, what motivates them, what gives them energy. So I think a lot of the things that I learned at Google, let's say, I couldn't really replicate in my own work because they were made for people with 1 million followers already, or £1 million or dollars already. When you're starting from zero, you have to do different things. You have to do things that don't scale, like you'll hear people talk about. And that means DMing people and sharing your podcast and like replying to people who you don't know on the internet and doing podcasts with them. Like, you know what I mean? So like that is something that takes up time and energy, and you have to have figured out the motivation to do that. Do you get what I mean? And a lot of people, they come from a big company where everything already works, and they're like, oh, well, I did this for a few months and it didn't work, so I'm just not going to do it anymore. And sometimes that's great, but for a lot of people, that's because they didn't realize the skill is a completely different skill.
Absolutely. And I think also because you talked about humility, it's something that I also noticed when I had like 300-400 subscribers. It's like you kind of want to show what you're actually doing, but you're kind of feeling bad because you only have 300 subscribers. But it's the humility to actually move forward, to actually, I think this is also one of the reasons because a lot of people don't start, because they don't want to be seen at the bottom, and that's why they don't even start something. Completely. And that's exactly, you're right, man. It's like, it's the embarrassment, man. It's like, it's the same problems we have, not just in creating a YouTube channel or a podcast. It's the same problem we have in everyday life. It's the same reason people don't ask out the girl or the guy that they like to go for dinner, like because they're worried about what it's going to feel like when they say no. Right? They don't want to apply for the job because they're worried about getting rejection letter. That's completely understandable, and that comes from thousands of years of us developing. But the difference is now, when we say someone says no for a job, there's another 100 we can apply for. 1,000 years ago, what that meant was you got rejected and you weren't able to live anymore, because the way the society worked then, it was like hunt or be killed, basically. Like we were in a completely different scenario back then. So I think a lot of our evolution comes from that sort of stuff that's thousands of years old, and it takes time to like train your brain to like move out of that when you can. So and a lot of the time you're not going to do that, right? Like we're still going to like want the piece of chocolate because it tastes nice or whatever. Like the instant gratification is still there. Nowadays it's in digital form. We get a dopamine hit every time we open up Twitter and we got like 22 likes on the post or whatever. Like that is the same feeling we might have got 1,000 years ago when we saw a berry in the tree and we like went and grabbed it and we got that sugar rush for like 1 minute. So it's just like fighting those primal things that we've had forever in new forms. Absolutely. And two anecdotes. Maybe one thing was before the podcast, I was quite nervous, quote unquote, because I contacted you and you have quite a reach on Twitter. And I thought, what if I interview Bilal and I say something stupid? But actually, it doesn't matter so much, because at the end of the day, I just iterate, and next time I will do it better, right? So this is something.
You're doing a great job, man. And I don't even have that much of a following at all. But it's just like, I try not to worry about the people's follower count, all that stuff. Because the interesting thing is, the people that I've interviewed with the biggest followers are often the most chill. Like Pomp has like 500,000 followers, and there's other people I know who have like 1,000 followers who are more impressive than Pomp, and I love Pomp. I think he's great, but just like the founder of Square, like he's a billionaire who created Square. He was an artist who created one of the number one businesses in the last 10 years. He has like a couple thousand, or maybe 10,000 people following him now, but he's got a book. Like, you know, it's just a complete different skill. Pomp is great at writing 50 tweets a day. He's funny. He can summarize ideas. That's made for Twitter. So he won at the Twitter game, whereas someone else won at another thing. So I just tried to I'll treat that person the same way I'll treat like an 18-year-old who's looking for help, because at the end of the day, we can learn from all those people, and we're just all humans at the end of the day, you know. Like, there's obviously, you have to show respect, but like also not put them on a pedestal, in my opinion, because they're just flawed humans, you know, like the way we are. We're all the same, man.
Yeah, definitely. And before we jump to numbers, the second anecdote was because you talked about it. I was on LinkedIn when I first got started on YouTube, and I contacted 1,000 people to subscribe to my YouTube channel. And
that's incredible.
Out of those 1,000, I think only 10 or 15 subscribed. So then you felt a bit demotivated, but you took the road actually and did the hustle, so to speak.
No, and that's literally the funnel we talked about, right? Like awareness, interest, desire, action. Yeah. You made 1,000 people aware. It got smaller. Only maybe 5-10% of them even read it, you know, and then a few managed to contact you back. And that's just how it works. So the game is really like looking at how can I make top of funnel bigger, and then how can I make that interest amount slightly higher percentage, because I've done the work to figure out who those people are, and they're more likely going to resonate with this. And man, you're killing it now. Like, I think you've got like more than 10,000 subscribers already. So it's clearly been growing.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And this is one thing I want to talk about, because numbers not only mean, or not every time mean that you actually succeeded, because I think you mentioned it in the podcast with Jack Butcher. I'm not sure which episode it was. I have to remember it, but I don't remember it right now. It was when you talked about this influencer who has like hundreds of thousands of followers, but actually one bought something from him, you know, that.
Yeah, it was like crazy. Less than 1 or 2 t-shirts. I think it was like they tried to sell t-shirts and they could only sell like less than 10 or something like that. And that's not the reason we use that example. I think Jack did a great job of summarizing it, but it's not to say that influencer, in air quotes, is a complete failure, like because they couldn't sell 10 t-shirts. It was the fact that those 10 t-shirts probably weren't the right thing to sell. Mm-hmm. So the what Jack said, and if people don't know who Jack is, you should check out his Instagram. It's @visualizevalue. He does these really cool, like he shares ideas in simple ways visually. So he said, like, if he created a cosmetics brand like makeup, no one's going to buy that from him because he's not known for makeup. Like, he doesn't know anything about it. But he puts like a little visualized value like slogan on a hoodie, and people buy it because it's kind of funny, and it resonates with like the ideas he's sharing and talking about. I think he is one of the best out there at doing what he's doing, niching down, understanding a certain mindset, and like keep hammering it out. And I've seen him, like, we've basically become friends now, and like I was talking to him literally today, and like the stuff that he is putting out, like even he's created a little meme account just for fun. Yes. Yeah. And the meme account is so specific. It's not just generic memes. It's using the ideas he normally talks about and making kind of funny memes about it. So like if you share that with your parents, they might not find it funny, but if people like us who follow that already, it will resonate deeper. So it's definitely worth thinking about.
Funny how small the world is, because I took both of Jack's courses, like Build Once, Sell Twice, and the other one, Visualize Value. And it's funny because I created, I think on day 141 right now, creating small visuals because I learned it from Jack.
Oh, amazing.
But it doesn't matter because it gets sometimes only 2 or 3 likes, but I actually enjoy it so much that I don't care about the likes. It's just being in the creative process.
Completely. No, and I think that's the way. I mean, there's a fine line, right? Because it comes back to your goal, right? If your goal is to grow exponentially and get X number of followers and do all that, and that's nothing wrong with that goal. It's just sometimes it's a distracting goal for a lot of people because it's so visceral and it just stands out so much, and people see it visually. But like what you just said there was similar to what I said, right? It was about the craft of creating. And if you're enjoying it, finding those things that are play to you, as you said, then you're kind of winning already. Like that process, you're enjoying that process. I think the problem is for some people, they take that too far, and in the back of the head, they secretly really do want to grow, and they're using that as an excuse, right? And there's an element of both of those things. So if you genuinely like doing it and you're improving your craft through that and you're sharing stuff that you enjoy, I think it's great. But it's just a matter of figuring out what the goal is.
Yeah. When it comes to being consistent, actually putting out stuff on a consistent basis, what advice would you give maybe your 18-year-old younger self and maybe the audience listening to this podcast right now? How can you be consistent? Yeah,
and I'll be honest about myself. I haven't been until recently. So, I have in other areas of my life, but the podcast I've been doing for 5 years. And in the beginning, I recorded 10 episodes. I put them out every 2 weeks, I think it was originally. But I had a full-time job, and that completely took over after I started my new job. So, quick backstory is the episode 2 of the podcast is with Scott Harrison, founder of Charity Water. After interviewing him, I joined Charity Water 9 months later because we liked the conversation that much. We kind of stayed in touch, and then I was like, oh, I'm actually inspired to go and work there. When I started that job, my podcast dropped off because, as much as my intent was to keep it going, it was really difficult because you're starting a new job. It was quite a big role. I'm managing a whole team. I'm trying to learn about this new industry that I know nothing about, right? It's starting from scratch, basically. And so I had to dedicate my time to that. So I didn't stay consistent. What I've managed to do now in the last, I guess the last year or so, I have been really consistent. And the only way I've been able to do that is one thing is making room for it and treating it like a job. I don't just say, oh, it's a side project anymore. I'm like, oh, this is half my time. This is what I spend is on the podcast. And again, coming back to that feeling of that embarrassed feeling, are people going to say, well, do you make a living from that? How much money do you make? Are you making the same money you made before? And that's all the stuff that people worry about, right? But I'm comfortable being well, no, this is something that is a part of my life. I do it for many different reasons. It takes up half my time. That's the first part, because a lot of people, if you're doing a full-time job, it is very difficult to balance both. Definitely you can do that. I'm sure you're doing it right now, but there's it's just a matter of figuring out how it fits into your life. Second thing that really helped me, it was committing to a regular cadence, which for me was once every Wednesday. To put an episode out, and I said that publicly. I said it on Twitter. I got interviewed for the Hustle newsletter, and they shared it in the newsletter that I was doing it every week. So once that was out there, I was like, okay, I need to stick to this now. And since then, I've done that. And then the last part is just try to make it easy for yourself. Don't overthink all the details. Just use the same templates. But also, I think it's important to only put stuff out that is high quality that you care about. So that's something I've challenged myself this year. Is I was looking at my episodes last night, and I was I generally am not I'm happy about every single episode I've put out. I'm not expecting everyone to like every single episode, but I did, because it was something I was interested in. We took out the stuff I didn't think that was useful for people, and they were all really good people. So that's kind of the challenge. Is for the rest of the year, I need to do this every week and only have great guests and only do high quality stuff. So it's about setting the parameters for me anyway, the parameters that will help me understand what's the quality I'm going for, and then also what's the cadence that I'm actually going to be able to keep it going for.
Where do you see yourself as being an individual in the world? How do you personally manage to make the world a better place? Apart from having the great podcast, of course. Is it something you think about, Bilal?
Yeah, definitely. No, that's a great question. It's quite a deep question. I mean, I'd say that it's something I've thought about a lot, because if you think about my background, I went from teenage entrepreneur trying to make money to a big company where I became too comfortable. I was not like rich, but I was like comfortable, right? Like I could live a decent life. Then I went the other direction where I went to a non-profit where I was clearly chasing something which was about doing good for the world, which I think is a noble thing if done for the right reasons. And I think the people there are doing that. So I've definitely experienced both sides of that. Now where I'm at is, I think it starts with me as an individual. Like, how do I, in my own small way, make sure every day I'm living the best I can for the people that are closest to me first. So that's my family, my girlfriend, my friends. Like, that's basically it right now, because we're not really seeing many friends actually. So just the small group of people that I'm speaking to every day, how can I make sure I'm there for them? Because that's already difficult, like with aging parents, stuff that's going on in their lives. That's my first step, right? If I can get that down, then I can look slightly wider. How can I help my community, right? And for me, that's like, for me, my community right now is partly the podcast. Like, so the people that care about the same ideas that I care about is basically my virtual community, right? So people like you and I, if we hung out in person, I'm sure we would be talking for hours, because we have these shared values. We care about growth and doing things in a certain way. And we probably both agree that entrepreneurship, or at least creating things, can create some good. Like, I'm not saying entrepreneurship is like saving the world all the time, because there's plenty of people who are doing stuff that's bad as well. But in general, if you just think in a capitalistic system anyway, the way things get, if someone buys something from you, they are buying it because you're exchanging value. So like, in the purest sense, as much as it's not like, curing kids' cancer, like in a purest sense, you have created something that someone else likes, and they're sharing their exchange time, which is money, for that thing that you've created. And also, obviously, it creates jobs, it creates opportunities, innovation, that sort of stuff. So I have a huge passion for that, obviously. I don't think that's for everyone, though, right? Like, for someone else, that's becoming a lawyer and changing the world through the court system and writing legislation. I think that's incredible too. For someone else, is going into politics. Definitely not for me. Like, I'm the opposite end of the spectrum on that side. But I know I have friends who are really good at that. They're great at navigating that world, and they can change the world in their way, in that way too. So I think it's just about like finding your lane and being true to yourself, having the humility, like you said, to say, okay, what am I and what am I not? I'm definitely not a politician. I could never be a real politician in today's form anyway, because I'm way too I'm gonna say wild stuff that I'm not supposed to say, because I get really frustrated when people are just like lying and saying stuff that is just like clearly politically driven. I just get turned off by that. So for me, as you know from listening to the podcast, I'll try to call it like it is. When I agree with something, I'll agree. When I don't agree with something, I'll try to, in a respectful way, push back and try to explore that idea. And with nuance, which the podcast gives room for nuance. In politics, even now, like, you do a presidential debate and you get like a few minutes to say your point on education. Like, how, like, every president should in the future have to go on a Joe Rogan podcast for 4 hours and talk about their politics, in my opinion, or like some form like that, uncut. No one in the audience, just like two people expanding on those ideas. We would learn so much about them. But unfortunately, the way it still works is all based on popularity, saying the right thing. And so that, for that reason, it's definitely not for me.
Yeah. Where do we see Bilal in 5 to 10 years? What projects have you planned?
Yeah, I'd say at the moment it's really just, I shared this recently, but I'm just really trying to just focus on now, like, and not answer your question, but like, I think for a long time I've always thought about 5-10 years from now, and I have this big master plan. But now I'm just really focused on like enjoying the moment, not to sound too zen, but just like be here. If I'm enjoying what I'm doing, let me keep growing every day. Like, something I wrote recently was like 10x in the macro and Kaizen in the micro. And what I mean by that is, we hear about is 10x moonshot thinking, which is how can you use technology to create something that's so much better. Like, if I ever create a company, like a proper company one day, I would love to try to think of that as a framework. And then, but Kaizen, which is continuous improvement every day, that's like the Japanese approach, right? that to me is like more on a personal micro level. Like every day, how can I be a little bit better? How can I improve my podcast a tiny bit better? How can I learn the craft of interviewing? How can I write better notes? How can I share this out to more people? Those things are more iterative. So I try to focus big picture, long term. Are there like big trends that are growing that I can be a part of? So I mean, podcasting was a part of that. Like when I started five years ago. Now I'm looking at blockchain. I'm looking at NFTs and all the crazy new stuff that's going on in that world. So I invest like my own money in stuff like that because I'm thinking longer term. How can I keep money growing on my own personal side so that I can do more with my time? And so yeah, that's kind of like on the investing side and like business side. I don't know if I'll be doing the same thing on terms of like marketing consultancy stuff. I think that's been more like a stopgap for now. You know, like I like doing it. I'm not against doing it, but it's not like my life's work. You know, it's just something that I'm good at. But you know, maybe one day that would be at a company or my own company where I'd like lead the marketing or something like that. But I don't know, man. I'm pretty open to exploring what that would be. I think for the moment it feels it's going to be more in this entrepreneurial realm, which is creating stuff myself, working with smart people, and just keep doing what I'm doing at the moment, man.
This is great to hear. Would you say you have found your purpose in life with a podcast, with everything you're doing right now?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think it's a good question. Let me think about that for a second. I mean, I won't say one thing. I definitely won't say a podcast is that, but it definitely feels that feeling of what drives me. So I'd say the purpose to me is more about, there's different levels to it, but for me, it's about what drives me. So learning drives me, meeting great people drives me, amazing conversation drives me. Like that gives me energy. And if I can take those skills that I feel like I'm naturally quite a good conversationalist, and I'm able to take out stuff and use the time that I take to research at a level that people notice, that they're like, oh wow, that was incredibly well researched. That's because I cared enough to do the research. So those are all my skills. And so I'd say like the purpose is marrying like your skills, your unique skills and superpowers in a way with like what's valuable for people in the wider term. One day that might just be having kids, like to be frank. If I had a kid, my purpose at the moment would probably be the kid, and everything else might go out the window. So it just really, it's hard for me to say now what I'd feel like in that moment. But speaking to older, wiser people than me, that often seems to be the case. Like they get to that stage and they say, well, yeah, all this other stuff was driving me previously, but now I realize actually what I need to be is this for this person. So yeah, I don't know if I've necessarily found a purpose. I think purpose is evolving, I don't think it's just one thing. I think purpose is also understanding yourself and developing yourself enough that as you evolve and grow, you continue to become aware of that. And that way you're able to continue feeding that part of you, So like my purpose 4 years ago was very different, because it was very pure, leave Google, go and serve a charity. And I thought that was for that moment in time, it was perfect. It was great. But as I was there longer, I realized actually what I'm really good at is this sort of stuff, and business anyway. And a lot of what I found with Charity Water was my job there became working with businesses to raise money for clean water, which was a lot of fun. But I was probably better suited to be on the other side eventually, So I would rather at the moment work on the stuff that I'm good at, make more money, and then be able to give back with time and money in the long run. At the same time, in those 2 years I was there, I was able to collectively with my team anyway, I probably was able to help more people through their collective work than I will in my whole lifetime, right? Because there's the infrastructure of the organization, and the money we raised, to put it frankly, was like tens of millions of dollars. I can't necessarily give tens of millions of dollars, well, I definitely can't right now, to a charity, right? So just that alone that helped hundreds of thousands of people. So that and that's not just me, but it's me as part of a bigger whole. So it kind of comes back to what we said earlier. Sometimes the best thing to do is to go join someone else who's already done the legwork. Scott Harrison, founder of Chaitwa, spent 10 years convincing the most successful business people in the world, this is a new way to do charity. I'm going to show you exactly how we do it, and I'm going to hire people from places like Google and Uber and Twitter to help make this happen. And I could then come in as someone who had those skills, to like help in my own little way. So yeah, it's really, I don't think there's one answer to it, but that's kind of how I feel about it right now.
Very well answered, Bilal. I appreciate it, and very well thought out answer as well. One last question before we come to the question rampage is, do you feel that you have a hunger inside of you? And do you think that because something happened in the past of your maybe younger self or when you were a child, that this hunger increased and then kind of vanished while you were working at Google, and then it like sparked something inside of you again?
Yeah, you see me smiling, right? Because I don't know if you heard the episode with Nick Huber, but it just went live. And this morning I was writing a little summary of this. So I'll share this with you when it comes out. But just look on my Twitter for a clip I wrote about dealing with bullying and racism, because it was about this topic.
Okay.
And yeah, I completely, in hindsight, I'm probably the happiest I've ever been now. Yeah, which is great. But because of some things that happened as a younger person, again, I'm incredibly lucky. Like I grew up in London, I spoke English, I was smart enough to go to good school. So the genetic lottery in many ways was great. So I can't complain about that. But I did suffer from some bad stuff. I was in pretty bad environments at times. I got bullied a bit at times. There was a lot of racism, especially after 9/11. There was some really bad stuff in the part of London where I lived. So yeah, I saw some like pretty bad stuff with like gang violence and stuff like that too. So it was just, I mean, I wasn't in a gang, but there were people around me that were, and I could see some really bad stuff happening. That stuff, as you get older, you realize that is traumatizing. The more you then speak to therapists and you learn from them, you're like, oh wow, that's been sitting in the back of my brain somewhere. And the way I reacted in that moment where I flipped out and got angry is partly because of that. So there's a lot of healing that needs to happen. Definitely a work in progress forever. But I think now I'm as control of those sort of emotions, and at least I can place those feelings and say, oh, I'm feeling this right now because of what happened to me at this age. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. Because I can relate somehow. And I think also that once you saw the beauty of life, you kind of work more on the beauty rather than in the dark.
Yeah, that's beautifully put, man. Yeah, I love that. And I think I also think sometimes it comes from being in a better place. So when I left that school where I had a bit of a bad time, at 16, that's when I started my e-commerce business, and I created this new identity naturally. Like I wasn't like forming a brand or whatever people say nowadays. That was just me on the playground selling people hats and selling clothes. And then I was like, oh, I can sell this on the internet. And that was just a very natural progression, but that created this new identity for myself. And sorry.
All good.
When you get good at something, you kind of get addicted to that feeling, right? Because you find something you like doing. And then you get confidence, which is incredibly important for everyone, but especially I can just say as a young man, I think it's important for everyone, but I'm speaking as a guy. As a young man, if you are going out in the world and you're not confident with who you are, it's very difficult, because there are certain things where you're going to be expected to do things that you're going to not even approach because you were too scared to do it. Yeah. And if I now think, oh, I'm not going to speak to this person because I'm afraid of them rejecting me or something like that, that is a really difficult thing you never get rid of. So you have to like process that by the reps of like practicing essentially, and go and be okay with feeling that feeling again, and dealing with it and understanding where that feeling is coming from. I think we're also going to a stage now where people like are worried about any discomfort at all. Like when people feel a little sad, automatically we will say, oh, this person's depressed and now we need to give them pills. Sometimes they do, like that. I'm not against people who need that for sure, but sometimes they need a change of scenario, and I think it just depends. Like for me, I could easily have gone to a doctor here and they might have given me some pills to take. I'm glad I didn't, because that wouldn't have helped me at the time. I don't think I needed to get out of my comfort zone and try different things and motivate myself to move in a new direction and to change my reality. If you're not loving your 9 to 5 every day and you come home and you're in a bad relationship, or you hate your husband or wife and your kids are screaming and shouting at you, like maybe that's a part of the problem. You know what I mean? So maybe it's not just the fact that your brain chemicals are in a certain way. And I'm not diminishing like people who actually do have that. I have very close people to me that suffer from real clinical depression, and they need as much help as anyone. So, but there's a fine line. There's a nuance to both of those ideas.
Yeah, and to wrap it up before we finally go to the question rampage, I think because you suffered in your childhood, because that's also what I experienced myself, is that kind of you try to find yourself more, you have conversations with yourself. This is how you develop better emotional intelligence and kind of develop this better plasticity inside of your brain. I'm not a neuroscientist by any means, but I think this is what it is. True. Then you can adapt to situations better, especially when it's like a sad situation or overwhelming situation.
Yeah, definitely, man. Yeah, I think being able to adapt is like one of the biggest superpowers. At the same time, to complete that thought, I think sometimes I got to the stage where I was adapting too much, where like every new scenario I went into, I was the one expecting myself just to adapt to that person, whether that's a new friend or whatever. And I would say, oh, well, what this person, I'd place that person. They're like, oh, I'm just thinking in Dublin when I lived there. This person is from Germany. They've never met someone like me. Or the person that they know who's called Bilal is a Turkish immigrant in Berlin. And I would like figure out these little things, and I would try my best to like build a bridge, which is a good skill. But sometimes I need to just say, I'm Bilal from London. What's going on? You know what I mean? So it's just like being comfortable with that takes time, because at that age, I didn't necessarily know who I was. I was still developing it. Whereas now I feel very comfortable in who I am, you know?
Exactly. I can completely relate, Bilal. I appreciate it sharing with you. Sharing this with us. Apart from all the theoretical stuff, which we talked about marketing, but also personal stuff. So finally, the question rampage, Bilal. I have prepared 10 questions for you. And optimally, you answer them in one sentence or maybe 2 sentences, as you want.
I'll try my best. All right, go.
Okay. Question number 1. What are you most proud of?
Oh, that's hard. I will say the thing that came in my head, to be honest, is my parents. And that sounds like a very cliche answer, but I just think I'm most proud of them because they came to the UK as like poor immigrants. They built a great life for us as a family, and they're very loving and caring. And yes, I'd say that.
Yeah, perfect. Question number 2. What was your biggest failure and what did you learn from it?
It's hard to say in one sentence, but I'll say the biggest failure was probably at time in Google when I was there. I did generally pretty well, but there was one stage where I kind of like, what's the word when you just check out? You know, so I checked out because I didn't love what I was doing, and I didn't have a green card. I couldn't really leave, and I think that was not a good thing, because that's a waste of time for everyone, you know. So overall, I still did fine. I did my job fine, but I wasn't thriving the way I was known to be, someone who was like pushing it all the time. And at that stage, I probably wasn't.
Okay. Question number 3. What advice would you give someone wanting to be as good in podcasting as you are?
Take it seriously, commit to it, invest up front in good quality audio. It doesn't have to be $500 like this, but it could be like $50 or €50 of good equipment that you can get, and practice a lot, and just don't worry about the first 20 episodes being terrible. Just keep trying and commit to a schedule, stick to it. Like I didn't do that, but in hindsight, that would be definitely worth doing.
Great advice, appreciate it. If you could spend one day with a celebrity, who would it be?
Thierry Henry, who's a football player. He's my favorite Arsenal footballer. There's lots of people. It's just for some reason that came to mind first because, I mean, I'm a huge Arsenal fan and he's my favorite Arsenal player.
Mm-hmm. Podcast you enjoyed recording the most?
Oh, that's hard. That's a hard one. Oh, if I'm picking one, I'd say in recent times because I've got like a short-term memory right now, or recency bias. I'd say probably Jack Butcher's one, maybe the original one. I think the second one we did live was really good too, but it's a different experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd already known him by that point, whereas the first time I was almost surprised how good and interesting it was. Everything just clicked, and it felt like I made a new friend, and I feel like I have. So I'd say his. And then in long, I will add one more. I'll add two more actually. I know I'm cheating, but This is Scott Harrison, episode 2, because that kind of changed my career and life in many ways, and it was really meaningful. And then I'll say Gary Vee. I interviewed him a few years later, and I won't even say it was my favorite interview. I think it was a good interview, but it was only half an hour, 20-30 minutes. But the whole environment was crazy. Like I was there live. Netflix was outside shooting with him. There's a famous rapper outside. There's like 12 people around us. It was just quite a surreal moment. So I'd say that was pretty cool too.
I have to watch that one. I have it still open in my browser. I have to watch it.
Oh yeah, check out. There's a video for that on his channel. Not my. I haven't put it on mine, but if you go on my website, you should be able to see it there.
Yeah, I think so.
If not, ping me. I'll send it to you.
Yeah, excellent. 3 most influential people in your life.
Oh, I mean, I mean it's probably fairly easy again, but like my 2 parents, mom and dad, and my girlfriend. I've been with her for some time, and she's very. She's my partner, so she balances everything out, and so I'd say those 3 people.
Mm-hmm. Great. Favorite movie?
Oh, that's hard as well.
I thought that was an easy one. So.
No, I mean to say one. I mean, if it was one, I'd probably say Goodfellas. I mean, there's so many, but like Goodfellas, I could watch. I've watched like 20 times. There's so many of those though. I'd probably give like a top 5, like American History X, I love, City of God, Pulp Fiction, The Matrix.
Yeah.
There's so many. I mean, there's so many. But
we will let you cheat here. We'll let you cheat here.
Yeah. Those are all great though.
Okay. 3 last questions. If you would be in my shoes, what would you have asked yourself that I did not?
I don't know if you borrowed that from me. I asked that sometimes too, but
really, I
asked that sometimes.
Really?
No, other people ask it too, but that's a good question. What would you have asked me? Let me think about that. I don't know. Nothing's really coming to mind. I guess like a pivotal moment or something like that. But I think you already kind of covered that in some ways because you had done research to know. Mm-hmm. But I guess a pivotal moment or something that maybe people don't know about me, which I also probably shared in the spoken word.
Probably because
I don't know. Yeah, probably
the expertise as well as your personal life. So
completely. Yeah. I don't know if there's anything that's coming to mind, to be honest. But so.
But it's fine. One superpower you would like to have.
Being more concise.
Okay, that's good. And
that's a hard one.
Okay, last question, Bilal. Related to that one as well. If you were a superhero, what would your name be? Funny one at the end.
Creator Man. I don't know.
Creator Man.
Creator Man. Just stay on brand. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I'd say that. I'd stay there. Actually, I'd say Pac-Man. That's quite a funny one too, because Pakistani, and it sounds like the game character. So
that's a good one.
Too.
Yeah, I like it. That's a good one, Bilal. Anything else you would like to tell the audience, because we're running out of time and you have another meeting. So.
No, so good, man. Thanks for doing this. Thanks for spending time researching and listening to podcasts. I really appreciate it, man. And if you're listening to this, you're interested, obviously, just if you're watching on YouTube, just open a new tab and search for CreatorLab. It's on there. Or if you prefer to listen, just open your podcast app and subscribe there. CreatorLab is the orange thumbnail. And if you're trying it for the first time, maybe check out some of the episodes we talked about. Jack Butcher's episode. There's ones with Sam Parr, the founder of The Hustle, which is all about paid email. The founder of Square, Polina Marinova. We talk about frameworks. There's so many good ones, but I'd love to hear from you. Tweet me on @BZaidi on Twitter too. That's where I spend most of my time. So yeah, DM me or tweet this and share that you listened, and we'd love to chat more.
Perfect. Now I'll put everything down in the description. I'll just pack it full of links. Everything is
perfect.
Good. And I hope that we'll maybe have a second part, because the first part was excellent. I really appreciate you taking the time, being on the show and sharing so many personal moments as well. So I really appreciate that, Bilal.
Thanks for doing this, man. Yeah, appreciate it. I know it's Friday night there for you in Germany, so thanks for doing this on a Friday night.
Definitely. Really enjoyed it. Thank you so much, and take care, Bilal.
All right, man. Take it easy. All right, bye-bye.